Of course, 2 years ago, a lot of you will probably remember that under my Cover Killer channel, I reviewed an album from a band that I love so much, they're one of my top 3 of all time. And well, I'm here to actually repost the review. However, that review is gone. So I'm going to have to redo it, and I'm going to redo it right now for you guys. The album Black Gives Way the Blue by Alice in Chains is one of those records where a lot of people are going to grow to either love it or hate it. However, universally will grow to just respect it. The reason why is, of course, sentimental, not to mention fan favorite frontman Layne Staley, of course, had died back in 2003 from a drug-related overdose of heroin, and, well, the whole thing was just a very large tragedy. Now, Alice in Chains had been disbanded for a large period of time before this. However, this basically sealed the nail in the coffin, quite literally, that there would never be an Alice in Chains reunion. And it was something that I think a lot of fans secretly were clamoring for, myself included. However, Jerry and the boys from Alice in Chains decided that, well, they're going to try to move on and make another Alice in Chains record without Staley. So they went out, they tried around some different vocalists, and eventually were led to Comes with the Falls vocalist William Duvall. This is a guy who, well, he's not Layne, but you don't expect him to be. You don't want him to be, because there will only be one Layne. Only one person, one individual, that being Layne Staley, will be able to really emote his particular voice in the ways, the despair, just the sheer depression or rage, the anger that Layne Staley was able to accomplish on such classics such as Dirt or Facelift, or even more recently than that, the Tripod album, which is just simply entitled Alice in Chains. So, with William Duvall, whenever it came to them releasing original material, you could kind of understand where there'd be a little bit of skepticism amongst the fans of what it was going to sound like. Actually, the funny thing about this is that the more that you listen to this album, you more than likely will grow to respect him as Layne's successor. Not to mention see him as pretty much a quality candidate. Now, while Jerry Cantrell's influence is seen throughout this album, and it's as early as the very first single from the album, which was Check My Brain, all the way through some of the softer moments, such as Your Decision, which is reminiscent to songs off of the Tripod album, not to mention stuff off of the Jar of Flies EP, such as Nutshell or the like. You really start to understand that William Duvall's role is not going to be to replace replace Layne Staley, not to be Layne Staley, but instead to be William Duvall, to be the man in which he's supposed to be, the man that he is. He does a very good job of actually trying to do what Layne Staley does with the emotion of his voice. He's able to do it to a certain degree, however, at the same time, you also catch glints enough where you can understand where Layne's individuality really shines forth. You know, there are songs such as Last of My Kind where you could just sort of hear Layne Staley's croon kind of come in a more triumphant, epic fashion, which is something that Layne was also able to do in spite of his overwhelming lean towards the more depressive or despaired side. But then you hit songs such as Private Hell or Acid Bubble where you hear that more creepy, more deranged atmosphere, something that you heard a lot more on albums such as Dirt, and you start to understand that, well, William Duvall can definitely do his share as well. He's able to mold together with Jerry Cantrell extremely well. And that's something that's extremely important because Alice in Chains for me will always not only be about Layne Staley, but it'll be about the way in which the two of them were able to harmonize or disharmonize some of the lines that were being sung. And the way in which those two were able to do it was legendary, so William definitely had some large shoes to fill in that regard. But he was able to do it very well, and Private Hell is still one of my favorite songs off of this album to this day, and will probably become one of my favorite Alice in Chains songs of all time, just simply put. Now, you will notice that a lot of this album is definitely dedicated to Layne Staley. And I'll be the first one to admit that whenever I initially concocted my review for this album, back in 2009, I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. Black Gives Way to Blue was the last track on this album, the title track, and it was something where I kind of had labeled as different and not really sounding like an Alice in Chains song. Well, it's because it wasn't supposed to be an Alice in Chains song. It's supposed to be a tribute to Layne Staley. This is actually one of the most powerful and passionate songs that Alice in Chains has ever laid a pen to and recorded. And this is something that, well, it takes a little bit of understanding in order to sort of respect something. And it's something that I should have respected right away. especially considering this was all about my hero. Now, there have been rumors afoot that Elton John made a guest appearance in this particular song playing the piano, and I believe that to be true. Layne Staley did have that kind of influence, you know. I mean, he's definitely a very important man. Not to mention, his albums have really rewritten history. If you think about it, a lot of the bands that you hear today, well, they had to draw some sort of influence to Alice in Chains, especially if you want to be depressing. Fact is that they just can't write creative lyrics like Layne and Jerry were able to mutually. Not to mention the music, half the times, doesn't reflect the mood. Which is one thing that I never understood about the emo genre. The music should be reflecting the mood. If you're crying and whining, you shouldn't sound like you're happy and babbly. I don't know, maybe I'm just old school. This is one of those albums, though, where, like I said, eventually you will grow to respect it, but I think a lot of people won't give it its just due because, well, it wasn't Layne Staley that was singing. And I know that it seems like I'm beating that dead horse, but it's just the truth. A lot of people really have cited that as the reason to either not get into the singles or not buy the album at all. That really hasn't stopped the sales, though. This is one of those albums where you can kind of tell right whenever it came out that Alice in Chains fans were going to come out in leads, regardless. Yeah, maybe Layne Staley wasn't singing with them any longer because he was now singing with people in heaven like Andy Wood. But still, it was an Alice in Chains record, and Jerry Cantrell's still pretty damn good. In fact, Jerry Cantrell's pretty damn excellent. And this William guy's not that bad, so a lot of people responded and bought it. This is an album that so far has gone gold, and I really think that this has platinum written all over it. Just give it some due time. It's an album that's still bought a good bit to this day, especially in my store. A lot of people will actively still seek it out, and after a year and a half of being released, maybe going on 2, that's pretty impressive. There's a lot of bands that might not be able to do that, especially if you're talking about a reunion. The Soundgarden Telephantasm disc, for one, was not one that was actively sought out. It was one that was bought, but well, I guess we'll see more whenever Live on I-5 or the new studio album drops. The new SDP, nowhere close. Good album, but nowhere close in the bias category. Really just shows you that bands such as Alice in Chains really, well, they would trump them. It's surprising, but Alice in Chains has one of those documented legacies that is just inevitable for you to fall in love with. You just listen to it, and just like this album, you just sort of listen to it and you grow to respect everything that has gone on. And you grow to understand why these songs are written the way they are. Because they're all written for a departed friend. And hey, that's what makes Black Gives Way to Blue a really high score. Not just because it's about a departed friend, but because they're songs about a departed friend that are written extremely tastefully and with all the passion in the world. 9 out of 10. Definitely a great return to form. Definitely makes me excited about future Alice in Chains releases. And William Duvall, you got my seal of approval, buddy. Don't fuck it up.